Yo, 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 what up, Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Lane County, and all of our friends, family, and constituents. Welcome on the porch. We have with us today a special guest, Aimw. How do you pronounce your last name, Amy?
Wichtendahl.
Wichtendahl. Amy
Mhm.
Wichtendahl. She is our Iowa State Representative for District 80.
Correct. Yep.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about who is Amy Wichtendahl? What has she done, and what motivates her?
Okay. Well, I am, as you mentioned, State Representative Amy Wichtendahl. As always, I always mention my pronouns are she, her, and my adjectives are freaking and awesome. I've had the privilege to be the first openly trans woman elected to government in the state of Iowa, elected to the city of Hiawatha City Council in 2015, and then just last November elected to the Iowa State House in 2024. So this is my 13th week of serving in the Iowa legislature, and it's just what kind of motivates me. Gosh, there's just way too much, for lack of a better term, bull crap going on in the government that really shouldn't. It really shouldn't be like this. I think we really should focus on the problems facing Iowans, the problems facing Americans, how to make sure that people can have and live a good life. And that never seems to really come up in the state government. So that's kind of what keeps me going. And it's just I'm an eternal optimist. So even though sometimes things are rough, I always believe there's always a better future in place.
Right. And I can totally relate to all of that. Um, Let me ask you, my first question is,
Mhm.
we're going to start right off with the nitty gritty. Let's talk about the changes to the Civil Rights Act. Let's talk a little bit about that and how that affects Iowans.
Yep, absolutely. So basically, what had happened in the end of February was Iowa Republicans had put forth a bill to remove gender identity from the Iowa Civil Rights Act, which had been in place since 2007. So nearly 20 years that this had been in place. Um, Essentially, it's a long continuation of their anti-trans legislation that they've been pushing through session after session each year for at least the past 5 years. What it does in the nitty gritty is it basically repeals out protections for transgender people in employment, housing, credit, education, and I always forget there's a fifth one in there, but basically there's five protected classes. People who are identified as transgender would lose protection. So it'll be legal to say I don't want to rent an apartment to you because you're transgender, or it's legal to say I don't want to hire you because you're transgender. Um, I do also think that the other packs of Iowans, how this will impact non-trans Iowans, is that people don't always guess right when it comes to guessing whether or not someone is or is not transgender. So a lot of times that will, you'll see that kind of level of discrimination against people who might be perceived to be transgender. And honestly, that can be there's almost anyone could conceivably fall into that trap, or sometimes it's just a method of just straight up harassing people to accuse someone of being trans when they're obviously not. I think the best example, unfortunately, especially with people on the right, have targeted like Michelle Obama for being trans, and she's clearly not, but they still keep kicking around that lie. And it's like I said, it's another avenue to harass and discriminate.
Right, right, right. And you did, when you first started telling us a little bit about yourself, you did touch on the fact that you were Iowa's first elected trans person in
Mhm.
government, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so that's why this issue is so important to you, I would assume. Is that correct?
I mean, it definitely one of the reasons. I always think it's interesting, because when I ran for the city council, I didn't run to be the first openly trans anything. I ran because I disagreed with how the city was handling the redevelopment of the Robbins Road, Emmons, and North Center Point Road interchange, with respect to how it was treating businesses. I ran on a platform of property taxes, and for the first part, like basically my entire first term, it really, kind of the anti-trans bills weren't really being brought forth to the floor. So it was just kind of like it didn't really start until about 2019 that these, and then really escalated after the COVID pandemic. Um, so I mean, definitely, I always believe if you are the first, you have an obligation to, one, not be the last, but also to stand up for your community when the government basically turns its ire on you, and to do what you can to use your voice to make sure that other people don't get negatively impacted by this.
Is it fair to assume that getting rid of discriminatory protect getting they'll uh, this current administration taking away discriminatory practices or making it easier for companies to have discriminatory practices, is it fair to say that that could be a slippery slope that can lead into other minority groups?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that there's a couple of things that I want to point out. I mean, one of the things that I heard in the aftermath of all of this is if they could take groups or civil rights away from one group of people, who else are they going to take it for? I mean, certainly marriage rights. We've seen other states coming on for that. Um, and not about 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, basically the state government went after diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the board. So it was across, targeting them in colleges, preventing local cities, counties, municipalities. And you see what a lot of the Trump administration has done along those facts. They basically like to categorize anything they don't like or anyone they don't like as DEI or divisive concepts, but they use it to erase the achievements of real people and to undermine, the skills of people. I mean, they when they were going through like the Pentagon's website, they were taking away Medal of Honor winners and labeling them as being DEI awarded Medal of Honor winners, and they're actively erasing black service members and other people's achievements and service to this country. So yes, absolutely, like it's kind of wholesale. They go attack it from different angles, but I mean the message is the same, really, that there is certain groups of people that they view as valuable, and Americans, and it's other groups of people, and a large part of the American people, that they don't view as quote unquote real Americans. So they'll come after it in a different ways to enable
Right.
these discriminatory practices.
uh, Tell me, what is your take on the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do you think that that's going to affect us here in Iowa?
I mean, I think just on a basic line, it makes us seem a less welcoming community, a less welcoming state in the eyes of the nation. I know the proponents, I don't know. There's really no good a lot of the time. I think a lot of times they just the underlying of this is just trying to push people to the margins to be able to go ahead and say, basically uses a kind of a thing for like intimidation towards minority communities. Um, I think, like I said, it makes this a less welcoming community. And I mean, we already have problems keeping people in the state of Iowa. We have prior to all this, and this is just acceleration. Because who wants to live in a state where wages are bad, the water quality is worse, you can be openly discriminated against, and just the weather sucks at the end of the day? Like, who wants to stay here and face all of those things? Um, and then it like, I don't know, it's just, like I said, I see it bleeding over from just like saying that you can't even have hard conversations about race in America. You can't have conversations about where we've been as a people. And I think the real harm on that too is just like, if you can't have those conversations about where we've been, we really do risk redoing the terrible things that we've done in the past. And I think, even on a surface level, you never know. You don't know what you don't know. And people may be good-hearted, good-natured, and just based on where they grow up or kind of what their surroundings are, don't necessarily understand what it is to live life through different minorities in this country, the challenges from different groups that they may face, and then just kind of even just kind of on that, it doesn't kind of on those things to just be able to basically come together and work in an environment and respect each other's contributions. All of that is actively being taken away.
Uh, Iowa is an agricultural state. Um, so these tariffs are definitely going to impact Iowa farmers. Um, what are what what type of legislation can we expect out of you to combat or to help these farmers out? What can we expect out of you and your constituents?
Um, I think with respect to tariffs, the downside is that it is a federal policy. I mean, certainly we will go ahead and push back and do what we can and call for Congress to go ahead and combat the president and just pull back that unilateral ability to just slap tariffs on people. What ultimately is going to happen, and I don't believe the state government is ready for it, is that you will start seeing um, you will start seeing like farm bankruptcies and people being impacted by the fact that they now have produce that they can't sell. You saw this with USAID when that was cut. Basically, you had farmers who had contracts to ship produce overseas as part of American aid overseas. Now they have all of this that they can't sell. It's rotting, and they're on the hook for that. The downside is that with the Republican majorities, they don't want to believe anything is wrong. They don't want to question the president. And so what will end up happening is likely so we can and we'll do what we can absolutely as a Democratic minority to push our Republican colleagues and to make sure that they're not making things worse for Iowans, to make sure that Iowans are going to be insulated and protected from these trade wars. But the unfortunate truth is they don't have to listen to us, and they frequently don't. And when it comes to the tariffs, they're going to fall lockstep until things get really bad. It's unfortunate to say, but I think the end result is, I mean, we saw with the farm crisis basically the end of the small family farm. And while there are still small family farms throughout the state, a lot of those may not survive this round of tariffs, which will further diminish rural Iowa, which will further cause consolidation within the ag industry. As basically, people, what's left of the family farms won't be able to survive, will get bought out by larger farming operations. So like I said, I wish I had better news for you on that. Like I said, we will do what we can to try to push Congress and the legislature to stop these tariffs before they cause real catastrophic harm.
Uh, he wrote, he signed an executive order effectively uh, demolishing the Department of Education. How do you think that that's going to affect us here in Iowa and our students and
I
teachers?
mean, it will have an impact. I know one of the things about the Department of Education is that it primarily benefits red states. Iowa has a little bit more ahead of them than some of the other red states, but I mean, like your southern states, your Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, things like that, really benefit from investment from the Department of Education because certainly there's grants for teachers, there's grants for schools, and funding for schools to be able to accommodate a whole host of just educational programs, nutritional programs, just money to keep schools operational or even help revitalize it. There's money for schools at the end of the day. Um, they say they want to take the money and just ship it back to the states. There's a real danger there because, especially if we're sitting on the cusp of an economic crisis, is that when the federal government hands out money, a lot of times it doesn't, it may be earmarked to certain things. One kind of thing right now that we have that's being debated in the legislature is kind of cuts to our unemployment because we're sitting on about $1 billion worth of COVID money. And that's, kind of the Reynolds administration has used a lot of money that she got from the federal government under Joe Biden to really kind of pad the budget, but that's not coming back. So when push comes to shove, and if the budgets are bad, those monies are going to find other places to go. So that doesn't necessarily mean that if they cut the Department of Education and they shift this money back to the states, there's no guarantee that that money actually ends up going to the schools. It can get shunted for balancing anything in the state government in order to especially if there's tight economic conditions to make ends meet. So it's going to have a real negative impact on our public school systems. It's going to basically schools are going to have to do more with less, and they've already been treading water for the better part of a decade now. It's going to likely mean further larger class sizes, less teachers, less educational programs, and then that's going to have a knockoff and continuing effect to diminish the quality of education that Iowa's children will receive.
Uh, Donald Trump had um, he had threatened to cut funding to Columbia University, I think it was, due to I think some misperceived notion of an anti-Semitic culture on the campus. It seems like he's interested in a lot of things that I think is below his station as president of the nation. Um, what is your opinion on the actions he's taken against certain law firms and certain uh, universities?
I mean, the short answer is, to be honest, it's really an attack on democracy. A lot of what you're seeing, more of an accelerant on under the second Trump administration, is a real rabid adherence to ideologies. So anything that defies the Trump administration's perspective or views or policies, they're going to be automatically put in the crosshairs, and they'll use any excuse that they want to give. And certainly anti-Semitism. While there is anti-Semitism in some cases on campus, and that should always be combated, that's not what is really happening here. They're using it as a smokescreen to cut funding and make demands that are more in line with what the Trump administration wants to do. And that's really what it is. It's hostage taking to enforce that ideology. It's like, do what we want, or we're going to cut your money. And basically, in addition to being, unconstitutional, especially with respect to trying to tell students what they can and cannot say. I mean, as you've seen here recently, that they're going after students who are in the United States legally, on a student, either on a student visa or a permanent residence. They're deporting them for their First Amendment protected speech, and it's naked authoritarianism. At the end of the day, it's um, conform or else is basically the policy that we're getting from the Trump administration.
I agree. That's what I see too. How do you feel about the mass deportations, and can you touch on how that affects us here in Iowa as well?
You mentioned agriculture. I mean, I know that within the agricultural industry, there is dependent on immigrant labor. I think the worst, or probably the most underappreciated, let's go with that one. Like, the most underappreciated fact of the American economy is how much as it runs on immigrant labor. And people complain about it, but the very fact of the matter is true that unfortunately a part of the US economy runs on immigrant labor. So what happens when you deport those immigrants? They're already, I think in California and other states, agricultural states, they're already saying that they can't get workers necessary to harvest crops. So that means that crops are going to fail. I mean, they say they want to rely on American labor, but Americans aren't lining up to do these jobs. Full stop.
Right.
And I think, the one thing that I heard, I mean, I definitely believe that we do need widespread immigration reform, and I believe that there's processes that we can do to make, give people a legal pathway to this country, to work in this country, and a pathway to citizenship. But that's not what's being done right now. Basically, it's targeting immigrant communities with the intention of deporting them and really putting them in just heinous conditions. You're deporting migrants to Guantanamo. And they have a right to due process. They have a right to the court system. They are just being rounded up and expelled from the United States. Worse, being sent to an El Salvadorian gulag, where a notorious prison that is rampant with human rights abuses. This is what our country's become now. Like, we're actively doing the things that America has basically criticized everybody else around the world for, and now we're doing those things. And it's it's all part of that authoritarian playbook. I mean, ultimately, the short term is it's going to have an effect on your food prices. It's going to have an effect on the availability of groceries. It's going to have an effect on elements of the economy from construction and other elements where you that are unfortunate that are reliant on immigrant labor. And unfortunately, that is going to have real negative consequences for your pocketbook, but it's still not solving the bigger problem is how do we reform the immigration processes in this country? That's not even being addressed right now. Congress is just busying itself with a tax cut for billionaires. So I think they are pulling at threads that should not be pulled on, and I think it's going to have a negative impact to every American with the way that they're prosecuting this.
Oh, yeah, I agree, and I think it's rather unfortunate that everyone is considered a criminal to some extent when they're really not criminals. They're just people trying to find better lives. They're trying to get away from harsh realities, and unfortunately landing in another harsh reality when they come here. Um, are there any legislature coming out of Iowa uh, at any point that could kind of help try to balance the scales in that regard as far as immigration goes?
Um, I mean, again, unfortunately, it's generally progressing the wrong way. There's only been a couple of bills that have come through the legislature that really deal with the subject of immigration. I think the main one is one of basically trying to force or giving the attorney general the authority to go after local law enforcement who don't comply with the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency. Um, that's been one of the main ones that's come through the House. But I mean, again, it's that all erupted because when a Republican county sheriff basically said he wouldn't comply with the federal immigration authorities unless they produce a warrant, which is the correct response. You have to have a warrant. That's part of the Constitution, and the fact is that the legislature wants to kind of the Republican-led legislature wants to kind of sidestep that when it comes to it. Um, I think that will probably also get tied up in court. It's hard to know for sure, but generally speaking, the ruling Republicans want to make themselves available to the Trump administration to do what basically over comply with immigration's custom enforcement officials. So I know they've been in Des Moines trying to round up people. I mean, it's a very real possibility they're going to start. You're going to start seeing ICE raids in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, at some point, Marshalltown, other places where they have it. Again, it's one of those things I always tell people. Again, remember, know your rights. Know your rights under the Constitution. You have a right to an attorney. You have a right to remain silent. And you have a right to due process and a speedy trial within the United States. Those are constitutional rights protected to citizens and people who reside within the borders of the United States. Just because if you are not a citizen does not mean that your constitutional rights are waived. You have constitutional rights. The government must abide by those. And I think it's duty of our people to call out that and to be able to document that when the government is violating those rights and to ensure the protections of the people who get caught up in these.
I feel like there is a full-on attack on democracy, uh, and I feel like Kim Reynolds is complicit, to say the least. Um, how what? So we there's been, I guess he's been touting on it, joking about it, but I think that a lot of people are starting to take him serious. What do you think about Trump's idea of a third term?
I mean, I know he's always joked about it, and I know that's the danger of just dismissing him from it. it's far more likely than I think most people give it credit for, because theoretically, all you would really need to do is just have the Supreme Court say, well, it says 2 terms, but it didn't say 2 consecutive terms and something like that. And he was out and it's only two. Like, they could use some tortured logic that says, sure, or you basically replace enough people at the Federal Election Commission or the judiciary to just basically say, sure, and ignore it. I still think that's a little bit more of a longer, a further stretch. I don't believe that's necessarily reality. And the thing that I always try to tell people, or like that's always a good perception, is like, okay, if you can run for a third term, even though the Constitution clearly says you can't, then anybody can run for a third term, including Barack Obama. So let's be careful what you wish for there, Donald. But I think, I mean,
Right.
it is. I mean, it is the authority. I mean, even in Russia, with under Vladimir Putin, like they just amended the Constitution. He didn't do any kind of weird end around or tortured logic under the Constitution. They just amended the Constitution so he could stay in office more and then extended his term. But we're clearly not there yet. Um, like I said, I think that's still a little bit farther fetched, though the probability isn't zero, and definitely something that we should guard against. I mean, we are seeing the largest assault on democracy in the history of the United States since the Civil War.
uh, what's your thought around this administration's executive order regarding election reform, and how do you think that might affect us here in Iowa?
I mean, definitely that's another one to really be concerned about. I know they tried something similar in the first administration, didn't really go anywhere. I think they got a lot of pushback on the states. I think the real danger on this is, and I was kind of watching something on this here today, they have something in Congress right now known as the SAVE Act. It doesn't save anything. In fact, it further diminishes and reduces people to cast their constitutionally protected right to vote. Because what it would do is basically mean that you'd have to have like something to the extent of like a passport in order to be able to register and able to cast a ballot. This I know would greatly affect women the most, because essentially, if you have to drag up your birth certificate, then you have to go and show your marriage certificate, and you have to find all these documents. It's one of those things that, like, if you've never had to do it, especially if you've moved out of state from the state that you were born in, it becomes a real problem to be able to try to access these legal documents. It's also expensive, and time consuming, and it basically throws up far more additional barriers. At the end of the day, though, that's something like that is what they're trying to do in order to basically safeguard the aristocracy, to basically safeguard authoritarianism, so that way, like, no, we're still technically a democracy. We have regular elections, but when 70 million people are being excluded from them and more, where it's just kind of a foregone conclusion, that's not real democracy. So something like that is absolutely a grave threat if they try to push it through Congress, where I mean, that's been, it's in not all, it's not been as bad in Iowa, but in other states, Texas specifically, where they have taken real pains to make it as hard to vote as possible so that they can maintain power and control the state. I think if you actually had free and fair elections, which were easy to vote in Texas, I don't think you would see Texas as extreme of a state in terms of its politics as it is currently.
Uh, the federal funding freeze, that's created like a lot of uncertainty for nonprofits here in Iowa, in Lynn County and Iowa. Um, and many of these nonprofits, they rely on the federal grants for essential services like affordable housing and senior meals. What steps can we expect out of Iowa to take to mitigate potential fallout for these organizations?
I mean, it's one of those things where, again, we have to push back where we can, and again, where the Republican majority doesn't want to believe anything is wrong. Um, the Like I said, the fund. It's kind of fun. It's not funny. It's tragic. One of the things that had happened was there was in one of the first weeks of Trump's presidency, with respect to that funding freeze, basically a group of states got together and then sued the Trump administration over the federal freeze. And then basically the federal court said, no, this is, you have to keep funding these agencies, these programs, but only the states that sued got the money released. So since Iowa didn't sue the Trump administration, Iowa's not getting that money. And it is, I think, in terms of, it's coming in the terms of almost hundreds of millions of dollars that aren't going to be coming into the state. It won't be felt immediately. In some cases, I mean, the first casualty will probably be, from what I've heard, there's about $70 million in grants that the University of Iowa isn't getting. So you're going to see a lot of programs shuntered there. You're probably going to see a lot of tuition hikes to offset and kind of make up for that. Cancer research, I know there's cancer research that's not being done. I think one of the hardest things for people to grasp, because it's a very, with the money coming, they don't necessarily know what the money is going for. And so in some respects that makes it easy for people to cheerlead. It's going to be, the harm is going to come later, and sometimes maybe years later, where, like I said, we cut cancer research and now our cancer rates are rising. We're not getting doctors or programs or treatment options in the state of Iowa, but people won't realize that until it affects them. um like I said, I wish there was more that this legislature can do. Like I said, I tried to take it on my initiative to try to reach out to work with our counterparts in Washington to make sure that we are not losing it. Like I said, sometimes funding gets restored, sometimes it doesn't. But like I said, the ruling Republican Party doesn't want to believe that the administration is doing anything wrong, or if they do, they don't want to speak up about it because they don't want to, upset the powers that be. So unfortunately, it's like, or basically the long-term prospect has to be to try to document as much as we can where it's being done, showing Iowans that yes, you were, this is how you were losing as a result of these cuts, and to try to reassume the levers of government so that we can more accurately and succinctly fight back against it.
I'm gonna touch back on civil rights again, if you don't
Mhm.
mind. Uh, Iowa has a rich but complex history with civil rights. How do you plan to address systemic inequalities, particularly in housing and employment, that disproportionately affects Black communities in Cedar Rapids and Lane County?
I mean, I think yes. I mean, definitely one of the things that we need, ultimately. I mean, ultimately, housing. There is a real housing shortage within this state. I mean, it's not unique to Iowa, but it is the fact that basically you can't. Um, Let me back up just a little bit. I know for, like, so basically for a lot of affordable housing in terms of multifamily housing, things of that nature, it isn't being built, or you're having just housing being purchased by out-of-state entities that are preventing people from being able to obtain affordable housing, and that shortage of available housing prices people out of housing wholesale. Um, Personally, you know, my targeted goal has always been to try to improve the quality of housing stock that we have in Iowa, to make it affordable for developers to build. Beyond that, to enable local governments to take an active role in producing public housing, kind of trying to reimagine public housing away from what it has been historically, because I think there's ways that you can do it, or just allowing cities to buy apartment complexes or develop their own apartment complex for the direct management to keep prices low, to enable people to go ahead and find housing, to prevent Wall Street and other groups from buying up new available housing by putting in like live-in requirements, to ensure that that's keeping housing prices sustainable and affordable. I think if you attack it kind of a multi-prong way from that, that enables, um, for certainly that enables the, people to be able to obtain housing. And then also to prevent the state government from further eroding local control with respect to like their housing boards, with respect to their, commissions and things of that nature, so that we can continue to make sure that people aren't being discriminated against within housing. There's been a real desire within this Des Moines to basically abolish or remove a lot of control to on the local level, to be able to adjudicate anything like this.
As a trailblazer in Iowa politics, how do you balance addressing these national challenges while focusing on the immediate needs of your constituents?
Um, I will have to say sometimes being in government is a weird, sometimes bipolar kind of nature. Like there are days where everything is hot button, everything is just fiery, and everything is just like, oh my god, it's like you walk into the Capitol building, you're like, oh my god, what fresh hell is going on today? And then it's like the next day you're like, oh, this is a great bill, I love serving on this. For me it's a lot of just doing the work where I can, doing the work with people on given any kind of issue to craft better legislation to make sure that people aren't being left behind with the legislation that we craft. And then, I firmly embrace my role as the caller out of BS whenever I can, just because there's a lot of BS going on right now and it needs to be called out. It needs to be addressed that saying, hey, no, this thing actually that they're doing is actually screwing you. This is a bad idea, and let me tell you why. And whether it's from like Doge or the federal funding cuts, or just the fact that this is a real concentrated attack on American democracy, it needs to be called out, because if we don't, I always think that's the downside of the Democratic Party, is that we always sometimes, or we fail a lot of times to counteract the message. We fail to basically say, hey, they're doing bad things. Like, I think, historically speaking, like within the last 10 to 15 years, within the party, we've just relied on, like, hey, they're clearly doing crazy stuff. Don't you see they're doing crazy stuff? What, like, clearly they won't vote for them because they're doing crazy stuff. We never make that argument. And so they just, we don't get
They
the
vote
votes
for
because
them doing the crazy stuff.
yeah, exactly. We rely on people to like think about it. No, it's just, it's yeah, so I mean that's I think the duality of it, where I try to focus, do the work, because I mean I'll be honest, I've always loved doing the policy aspect and nature of it, of government. Like when I was on the city council, I could nerd out on a lot of that stuff, and I still do. But like it's, when it's, the thing is, I would say 70-80% of the bills that run through the legislature are non-controversial. It's those 10 to 20% that you have to watch out for, because those are the ones that cause the real harm, and those are the ones you got to go to the mat on, because if you just kind of like sit and throw your shoulders up and be like, oh, there's nothing we can do, I guess I'll go push the no button. I mean, then it just kind of becomes, it just blurs into the noise of all the things that we have going on in Iowa, and that's where the real harm comes in.
There's been protests across the nation. Uh, do you have any advice or words of support to those that are uh, taking their time to stand out and amplify our voices?
Absolutely. And I got the chance to speak at the Hands Off rally down in Iowa City yesterday. And a lot of my message was, essentially, in these authoritarian times, never say it's not my fight, because authoritarians will pick us off one by one by one. So, even though you're not, trans, when they come at your trans neighbors, you speak up and stand with them. If they're coming at communities of color, if they're coming at immigrants, you stand with those communities. Because if we all just say, hey, it's not my fight, not my battle, they'll pick us off and they'll pick you off and they'll get the other people. And then there will be no one left to fight this. So I will say, always stand up with the people who are in the crosshairs. Document everything. Authoritarians don't want transparency, and they don't want their actions to be seen, what they're really doing. So tell those stories, capture it on cell phones, and then find the people who can fight back legally to make sure that we uh, stand every time they try to want to cross the constitutional boundaries. They are going to have a real fight on their hands, because if we just throw up our hands and say it's too much, they'll win. And at the end of the day, you see the power of solidarity, the power of people. There is nothing that we can't accomplish if we do it together. So keep fighting, and just, don't let the bastards win.
You said that you spoke at a rally in Iowa City yesterday.
Mhm.
Um, how do how does someone here in town in Cedar Rapids and its surrounding areas, how do we reach out to you and maybe invite you to speak at some of the rallies that's happening here in your own backyard?
Probably the best way is to send contacts through my legislative email. And I'm trying to funnel things through that, partially because I've learned that if I do things through Facebook Messenger, I'll kind of forget about them. And then it's just kind of like,
Right.
so that way, if it goes through my legislative email, amy.wichtendahl@legis.iowa.gov, that way, my clerk sees it. That way it's in kind of an official thing. We can get that in my calendar, which more or less just kind of governs my life right now. So that's the most important thing, to try to get that in there. Yeah, and I'm always generally happy to speak at most events. Yeah, so the hands off rally I know yesterday, that happened all throughout the state, all throughout the country. Like I said, I don't think Cedar Rapids actually had any former speakers, but we were definitely you definitely saw the crowds lined up downtown. I think I got invited to another one up in Mason City, that I could only do one, unfortunately. But I'm generally always pretty happy to talk if you've got an event. So yeah, I would say that's where you would send that to.
Something that I really like to do is to give flowers to our representatives who come down and talk to us, not just only around voting time, but
Hmm.
come talk to us at other times too, and come be seen and let your voice be heard, and let us know that you hear our voices too. And so I like to make sure that you get your flowers, because that's what you're doing today. You come down here with us, the regular folk, and you're talking with us, and you're hearing the things that we have to say, and uh, you're paying attention to our words. And so we really like to show our appreciation for you to spending this time with us and talking about things that matter to Iowans.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. It's kind of ironic that you mentioned flowers. My mom texted me just like a half an hour ago, and she's like, "I think we should bring back the '60s revolution concept of flower power," kind of thing. So I think that's really cool. Um, yeah, I don't know this. My mom, a side note, she's a wonderful kind of church lady, very mild mannered. But gosh, these last few months, she's really kind of dusted off that '60s counter protest kind of culture a little bit. I was like, God. But no, I'm always happy to come down and talk with people. I mean, that I figure is the job of a representative, even if it's not, even if you want it, her having hard conversations that are impacting real folks. Like that's the job of a representative, to represent and to hear the voices in their community, even if they may necessarily disagree with, my whatever. It's I'm still the representative, and I need to hear the voices because it helps me make the best decisions on these laws that impact all of Iowans. So I'm always happy to be there.
Well, thank you again for your time. We'll really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us on the porch. We will definitely be keeping a close eye on you and the moves that you're making, looking for ways to help support you in the legislatures that you're going to be pushing for. Um, Again, thanks a lot for hanging out with us on the porch, man. I'm going to let you get back to your day.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. And hey, like I said, if there's you want to hang out again, I'm always more than happy to.
I'll definitely be reaching out to you again.
All right. Thank you so much. You have yourself a wonderful rest of your weekend. Okay.
Thank you. You as well. Bye bye.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
And there you have it, folks. Aimw Wichtendahl, and she's our Iowa State Representative for District 80. Uh, Take a look, check her out, see what uh, legislatures she's pushing and pulling, and find out ways where we can help to support her and make sure that she can support us. Again, this is your boy Turé, and you've been chilling on the porch.